Hello, this is Holly with my Do-insertion revision. So this screencast, I'm going to be doing it a little differently. I'm not quite going to go through and explain everything the same way I did in the original screencast, but I'm kind of going to go through and explain my revisions and why I did that, and then kind of how I would use my infographic teaching now that it's revised. So first things first, I decided to take Sylvia's suggestion. She is one of the elementary school teachers in our group. I'm sure there's more, but as of right now, I only know about Sylvia. And she said that this would most likely be a third or fourth grade level. And I agree with her. Looking back, I originally had said grades 1 through 3, and I think that that's a little too high level for first grade. So I'm going to agree with her and say this is probably a third or a fourth grade um, level activity instead, or infographic. So I left my title page the same. I still have my do as my title. I call it the helping verb in my definition of a helping verb. But my very next section, which originally was form, I chose to change quite a bit. So at Dr. Versalati's suggestions, I moved form to the bottom, and I combined my where does it go section, which was a section on its own before, and the why do we use it section, that was another one that I had two separate sections there last time. And I decided to combine them, and I actually, after putting it together, think that it flows a lot better as well. So I went one use at a time, or one way we use do insertion at a time. So I still kept my examples first. So I went with the most used use for do insertion, and which is negation. And so I started with that, and I gave my examples. And instead of having a what do you notice at the bottom of all the examples, I put it after each. So I have my examples, and then I have what do you notice about these sentences. And at this point, I would pause and let them think about it. I would ask them to give me their observations. So maybe at this point, I'm hoping someone comes up with the fact that they notice it comes in front of not. Um, and maybe they point out that you see does versus did versus do. So at this point, I'm just asking them for their observations. And I am trying to get them to highlight the fact that the not necessarily answer, but what I was looking for is to make something negative. So that's what these examples are showing a pattern of, is to make something negative. So I kind of combined my where does it go and why it's there. So here's the where it is, and here's the why it's there type of thing. So it's combined. And then I did take the suggestions of my 3 peer reviews, who said I probably didn't need all 5 uses of do insertion, so I did cut that down to just 3. And so my next one was my examples first. And so I have, at this point, do you like chocolate? Do we have a test? Did you see that? Does she play soccer? And I still have the what did you notice about do in these sentences? So again, I would pause, I would ask for observations. What did they notice? Maybe they're noticing it's at the front of the sentence now, and they're also noticing these are all questions. So then we're putting 2 and 2 together here, and we see that it's to make yes and no questions. So, and then there's a few more examples after that. And then my last use I have here is for emphasis still. So I have my examples. I have you do like chocolate. We do have a test. You did see that. She does play soccer. I still have my what do you notice. Maybe in this particular section they'd tell me their observations, such as it comes before the verb. And maybe that's what I'm trying to get them to see. And I would show them then, once we've discussed that, yes, it's to emphasize. And maybe at this point, this is the trickier, I think, use of do insertion. So maybe I might ask them, what do you think that means? What does emphasize mean? What's the difference between I ran in track versus I did run in track? What's the difference between do you all like music and we do like music? So I would get them to kind of see, what does emphasize mean and how would we use that differently? Kind of take some time out here to practice that. So those were, I shortened it to those 3 uses, and I think that that made it a lot more concise and easy to understand at this level. And it kind of combined my 2 sections there, so it looks a little different. After that, that's when I would ask them, okay, what do you notice about do then in general? Like, what does it look like? And maybe then I would be able to go over morphology, the morphology section. Obviously I wouldn't use that word, but what does it look like? And they've already seen all of these examples. So after going up through all these examples, what different kinds of do did you see? And so then we would go over that in the form section. What all did we see? Well, I did change the section just a little bit, not a lot. I did kind of like it the way I had it before, but I did get 2 suggestions actually that I should keep them separate, present and past, and I did agree with that suggestion. So I have my present here, do, does, don't, and doesn't. I still kept them in contracted form just because I think that at this level, at 3rd grade level, that this would be more confusing if they saw it than do not, because at this point they have seen do, and I want to point out to them that yes, it can come in contracted form. So I left it that way, but then I do have my past over here, did and didn't. So I think having the form section afterwards kind of again gets them to find the patterns first. Like I used a bunch of the different examples of do in all of these, so kind of getting them to point that out. Like it's not just do. What other forms are there? And then I still kept my caution section. I believe that was still useful about the main verbs and helping verbs. So we would kind of go over that. We would go over why is does a main verb here versus a helping verb, and someone in their suggestion mentioned, would they understand helping versus main verbs, and would that be confusing? And I think I mentioned in my first screencast, but maybe not. I would assume that main verbs had already been covered at this point, so that I would have thought is prior knowledge. So going over helping verbs as opposed to main verbs should not technically be confusing. It's supposed to just point out that do and does can be the main verb. Actually, all forms of do can be the main verb instead of just helping. So I left that the way it is. I think that's still helpful. But I did change a little bit of my practice section. So at a few people's suggestions, I took Dr. Bersolati's suggestion about making sure that my practice section goes in the same order that I went in way up here. So since I started with making negative, going into yes and no questions, I decided to put those in the same order. So making them negative, making them yes or no questions. However, I did leave out the emphasize part. Again, I think that that one was a little more challenging than these 2 particular uses of do insertion. I still could add in, maybe we can try a few emphasizing ones. How would you emphasize this sentence? Whatever. But at this point, I just kind of decided to, since I'm trying to keep it simple to 1, 2, 3, I left out the emphasize. Looking back, maybe I still could keep that, but at this point, I'm going with it. So I kept my negation and my yes or no questions. However, I decided to kind of make my number 3 just a single question, a challenge question, and I kept it the same one. So she didn't do the homework last night, and I'm challenging in the statement which do is the main verb and which is the helping verb. So still getting in that practice between main and helping, but kind of letting them know that yes, this is going to be difficult so that they don't feel bad if they don't automatically understand it. So at this point, I would probably use this infographic and this information, and I would carry on to the next day, and I would probably have them come up with more of their own examples of each of these. But I think that my final draft of this infographic is now a little more orderly, and I think it makes a little more sense, and I'm hoping that it is a better revision of my original. So that being said, that concludes my screencast on infographic number 2. Thank you.